There we go. That's not a very dramatic entrance. Just wanted to keep it basic. I spent way too long building this whole place, but I feel like I should explain what's going on. And also start with my upload schedule. It's been a little bit non-existent lately, just because school's been really heavy, but it's lightening up, so hopefully I can start uploading more. But I feel like I should explain what I'm doing in this area, because basically I'm starting a new series. And yeah, anyway, let me explain. Basically, I was talking with Wizard, and Wizard was all like, "Hey, clever balloon, I don't know Redstone very well." And I was like, "Well, hey, Wizard, why don't I teach you Redstone?" And he was like, "Hey, that's cool." And so I was like, "Wait, what if I just made it a YouTube video? Then you could watch that. Then all my viewers could watch that." And he was like, "Oh, hey, clever balloon, that's a good idea. Also, you're the greatest YouTuber of all time." And I was like, "Thanks. I know." And that's the exact conversation that went down, so no need to double check that or anything. And yeah, so I'm going to be starting a new series called Redstone from Scratch. Basically, there's a lot of Redstone tutorials on YouTube, like a ton, but I haven't been able to find a lot of them that go into like very bare minimum basics that start from like absolutely the ground up, like for someone that has absolutely no knowledge of Redstone. So I'm going to start from that, and I'm going to, I guess, progress to more advanced videos, but I'm going to start like episode 1 is just everything basic with Redstone for people who don't know any Redstone whatsoever, just basic mechanics. Then I'll get up, start doing devices, then I get into more complicated machines, and basically if you're looking to learn Redstone, you can just do all of it here. So yeah, I think we're going to get started, and this episode is basically just the basics. And yeah, so I'm going to go and show all the components and explain some basic stuff like that, and also how redstone wires work, or I guess the dust trails work, and how like connectivity works and all that stuff. And so let's get started. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe. It means so much to me and Wizard. And yeah, it costs you guys nothing. And it's just awesome. So let's go. So this whole video is basically going to be the basics, and I'm going to split all my redstone components into 4 different categories. This is not the official categories, it's just what I use and like to call them. And yeah, so I'm going to go through each one, and Wizard had a really good idea. I'm actually going to timestamp each explanation, and right now I'm just going to briefly describe each one and call the name of it, but in the end I'm actually going to do like a little demonstration of what each one does. But anyway, let's go to the 4 categories. So the first one is power. We have redstone blocks, repeaters, redstone dust, and comparators. Then we go over to detection or inputs. We have wooden pressure plate, stone pressure plate, weighted pressure plate light, weighted pressure plate heavy, daylight sensor, observer, target, lever, tripwire hook, wooden button, and stone button. Then we go over here to outputs. We have piston, sticky piston, dropper, dispenser, and redstone lamp. Then finally we go to transport. This one has hopper, minecart with chest, powered rail, normal rail, detection rail, activator rail, and minecart with hopper. There's a couple more redstone devices and components, but I'm not going to explain some of those just because they're extremely basic, like minecart TNT, and they're not super useful in like everyday redstone. But these are the basic ones, and slime blocks and honey blocks will be covered in a separate video with actual pistons and stuff like that. That'll kind of be all one category. And this video, I'm basically just going to go through and show an example and some basic redstone stuff, mostly with power, to explain how redstone works. And then I'll be doing future videos where I go like really in depth to the pistons, and I'll go really in depth to like minecarts and stuff like that. And yeah, we'll get all into that, but right now I'm going to start with power. So first we're going to start with redstone dust. So redstone dust is pretty basic. It's just the wiring of Minecraft. It's used and it's placed in a track, and basically you use a power source, and it travels along and activates an output. So from the power source, redstone can go up and down blocks and across things, and also can do this weird staircase effect with half slabs to power its source, except if it tries going between whole blocks, then it gets cut off. So this is a good way to block it. And also redstone at a maximum can travel 15 redstone dust from the power source before it becomes not lit, I guess. So I can go here if I start going out. Eventually, redstone loses power, just like that, and it will no longer power the lamp. So it does have a limit. Also, when redstone is placed, it kind of works like minecart tracks. It has to point directly at something. So right here, the redstone curve does not light up the lamp, but if I remove this, it points directly into it and lights up the lamp. Also, redstone can travel in a straight direction so long as it has something to travel through. It can travel through one singular block, and see it lights up this over here. However, it will not again light up redstone dust. It can just go through a block, and it basically powers this block and everything around it, which includes this. And that works the same way how redstone can be activated from things through blocks like this. And also redstone in its natural state just forms a small cross, and basically I think that points in all directions. But yeah, but if I were to do it like this and create a straight line, and then basically made one here, it shouldn't activate. Now for powering, we have redstone torch and a redstone block. These both output the same 15 long streak of redstone, and they pretty much act the same way. They're pretty much the same component, except one is a torch and one's a block. The torch is way cheaper to make, and they're very similar, except there's a couple like very minor differences of how they actually power the redstone. So redstone blocks are constantly on, nothing can ever change that, and they can be moved by pistons, but you can see there's nothing I can do to turn it off. However, redstone torches, if they're on a block and I power that block, it'll temporarily turn off the actual torch. So if I use the button like this basically makes a really good way as a signal inverter. So I can just hit the button, and then I'll actually turn off the lamp instead of temporarily turning it on, as it would if I used a button. I just do like this, it turns it on, and instead it flips that. So redstone torches power everything all right next to them, like this, and they also power the block directly above them. So this can be used to basically turn other redstone torches on and off, which allows you to make these really cool torch chains that go straight up. So I can just hit the button, and it'll turn the lamp up there, which is a lot easier to do vertical redstone compared to doing some kind of weird redstone staircase, which takes way more redstone to do. And the advantage of torches, as I mentioned before, is that basically the output right next to them, but also they can hang on the side of walls. So I can hit this button, it'll deactivate the torch, which then, I guess, deactivates this torch, which turns on the lamp. So the next circuit, basically as I explained before, all redstone can go for 15 blocks before it runs out. And so what do we do? We want it to go farther than that. We use the next tool, which is called a repeater. So the repeater, you place it at any point of redstone, I guess, that's activated, and it basically repeats that signal and puts it back at a signal strength of 15. So this can go another 15 blocks, and if we wanted, we could do more, and then it'll go even farther with a stronger signal. And redstone, the way you can tell its signal, it gets dimmer the farther it gets away. So this is full power, and then it goes weaker and weaker and weaker until block 15 at its weakest point, and that doesn't actually affect redstone at all. That's just a visual indicator on how much redstone you have left. But basically, they both output the exact same amount of signal. They're not going to make like a lamp dimmer or anything like that. It's the same exact power. So there's two other main functions that repeaters have. One thing is that they can create delays, like this. The lamps go from right to left. I'll show you again. And the other is they work kind of like diodes, which is a real-life term you don't really need to know about. Basically, the redstone goes in one certain path from which way it's facing. If I turn it around, the redstone will not go through that path. It can only go in one direction based on which way the repeater is facing, which there's a little arrow on it that kind of indicates that. And yeah, and also every single repeater, as I mentioned, they cause delays. So repeater, when you naturally place one, it delays the whole circuit by 1/1000th of a second, and you can click on them, and it basically moves the torch to the right. Every single time I do, with a maximum of 4, it delays it by another 1/1000th of a second. So if I put it here, that is 4/1000ths of a second, also called a tick. So most redstone engineers kind of call them ticks. So that is 4 redstone ticks. Here's an example. So basically I can hit this button, and all of these are on 4 ticks, and it makes the signal extremely slow before going to the actual output. And here again, another cool feature is basically if you power them, unlike Redstone Dust, they can actually go straight through blocks. So that's very useful if you need to, like, I guess, put something through a block, or if I want to put something up here, it works again the same way like Redstone Dust does, where it just powers it up there. Another cool feature is because redstone repeaters cause delays, if I were to create a signal like this, and basically loop it, it creates what's called a redstone clock, which is just a self-repeating circuit like this. So we can just have that, and it travels around here slowly, and basically redstone 1 cancels out before it gets back to itself, which kind of makes it repeat rather than just be a constant signal. But if I were to continually power this, then it would just get stuck like this. But if you don't do that, and you depower it really quickly and keep a tiny bit of power running through it, then it makes a clock, and basically can just make things repeat like this. And there's 2 more features to explain. So one other thing is redstone gets really weird because it kind of links up and it gets into bunches and tangles whenever you try pointing in a straight direction that's next to each other, because redstone just attaches. And this can get weird if you're trying to make like multiple buttons hit things, because see, it just hits all of them. It doesn't matter which button you hit. And that get annoying. So how repeaters are useful is, because I said repeaters only go in one direction, that means also they can't be activated from the side. So if I do them like this, I should be able to just hit this one button. It'll power just the one lamp. Then the other lamp again with a delay, and the other lamp, and it splits it up, and it's super useful for that, especially if you have different circuits. I'm just going to do a quick example one real quick. So for whatever reason the lines need to get really close to each other for a second, you can just add some repeaters in, and we'll add a slight delay, but at least the different circuits won't actually combine. And just bear with me, it's pretty complicated because repeaters have absolutely so many features, but here's the last one. So repeaters can actually lock themselves. So one repeater pointing to another one like this creates a bedrock texture, and basically it locks whatever state that repeater is in. So right now it's off, so it's going to stay off. So if I try powering it, it doesn't matter, it's just going to stay off. However, if I don't do this, and first I turn it on, then I lock it, then I can turn this one off, it's going to keep that state that it was in. So I actually haven't gotten super into on what the purpose of this is, but I don't know, it just does it. So comment down below if you knew what this did before, if it was even a feature before, and if you've made any cool builds using this, because I don't think I've actually ever used this. So the next thing to talk about is comparators. So comparators are honestly really weird. They're hard to explain. I'm probably gonna have to do a whole separate video explaining more, I guess, features of the comparator, but basically it just, okay, it's hard to explain. Basically, it detects item updates and block updates and items within blocks. So yeah, I'll show it over here. So comparators can work through blocks, and basically they'll scan things that can change. So chests can be filled, and as I fill a chest with a single stack, it increases one, I guess, block length of redstone. And as I keep adding more stacks in and the chest fills up, it does a more powerful signal. And also full stacks of ender pearls or swords also count as full stacks. And write up a little bit wrong, but basically it powers stuff. Then you can also go into lecterns, and as you turn pages, it has a more and more powerful signal. And then it can also scan things such as cauldrons, and as you fill with water, they, I guess, emit a more powerful signal. This is where repeaters are useful, because repeaters can take a very weak signal and turn it into a very powerful one. So you can put it right behind it, and as soon as you get any kind of signal, it basically does a full-powered signal for 15 blocks. Another cool thing comparators can do is if you use them to make a redstone clock, almost like you would with repeaters, it acts a little bit differently. It does this thing called a pulse extender. It's a little more complicated, so I can go into further detail in a different episode, but basically it keeps the signal going on for a lot longer. So one button press, rather than just lasting for a second, could last like 3 seconds or something, and you can see the redstone slowly fading out and getting weaker and weaker. And this is more useful when you want to do different things, where you have the signal that goes up and then it slowly fades down if you do like a line of redstone lamps or something like that. Again, this will be a whole other episode, but comparators can do some pretty cool things with their signal outputs, such as making item filters like this with slime balls. So I can put anything in this chest, it doesn't matter. But if I put slime balls in, only the slime balls will go through, and it's this output chest. And the last thing comparators can do is be weird. So you can set them into subtraction mode, and they do this weird thing where they take like a signal into the side, and then the signal they actually read, it takes this signal strength minus this one, and then outputs a different signal strength. It's weird, but yeah, I don't know the applications of this. I've never used this either, but basically comparators can do some pretty weird stuff, and that'll be a whole other episode. And I think this pretty much concludes the whole redstone basics part with everything to do with power. And that was going to be the longest segment of this video, because that's just everything relating to how basic redstone works. Everything else is just going to be basic descriptions of what everything does, which I'll break down in separate videos at a later time, because I want these videos to be short, but also informative. But I don't want to drag this out and make it like a 20-minute long video, just to explain the basics of redstone, because that's the issue. It's either like things are way too simple, or they're way too long, and you can't find this stuff easily. So I'm trying to get a kind of a mix of that. So yeah, let's get into the other stuff though. So on to section 2, inputs. So 4 of our starter inputs are pressure plates and buttons. So there's a wooden pressure plate, a stone pressure plate, a wooden button, and a stone button, and a couple other things. So basically, wooden pressure plates and stone pressure plates, they're pretty simple. When something gets on top of them, they output a redstone signal, and they can also go through blocks and input redstone signals. The only difference between wood and stone pressure plates is that, well, wooden pressure plates can be activated by arrows that are shot at them, and anything else such as like items dropping on them, where stone pressure plates cannot. The only way they can be activated is if something stands on them, and that also includes if like a mob or an entity stands on them. Wood and stone buttons are pretty similar. You basically just click them, and then outputs a redstone signal for a short amount of time, and then it stops outputting that signal. The only main difference is wooden buttons, the signal actually lasts a little bit longer than the stone ones do. So sometimes if you need like a quicker pulse, that you want to hit the stone button instead, and also wooden buttons can be triggered by arrows. Oops, I just pressed it. One sec. There we go. And the actual arrow will hold it in until the arrow despawns. And now our next input, we have the weighted pressure plate light. So it basically looks like gold. And how these work is they detect multiple different items that are dropped on them, and each new item that's put on it activates another distance of redstone pretty much, and it ups the signal strength by 1. And this can also work with just doing the same item but with multiple stacks. So if I throw a bunch of these out for a second, it sees them as different items and inputs a signal. Then they all kind of group up into one section of items, or like a bundle of them, and then it only detects as one. Also, what it can be used for is each animal that steps on it, it basically detects that and pushes it out another signal placing. So if I just keep adding a couple more cows, there we go. So it's really good if you need to like know how many animals are in an area, or they're from mob farms, like like you have like 16 zombies in a chamber, and you can just kind of extend the signal to determine how many mobs you want to check if they exist there. And so heavy-weighted pressure plates basically act exactly like the light ones. They're pretty much identical, except they have a much higher tolerance. So instead of like one mob activating one link of redstone, you need a lot more mobs or a lot more entities to actually start activating the redstone. So it's basically if you're trying to count, I don't know, like if you want to count like the mobs in groups of 5 or 10, I don't know the exact value, but essentially these 5 mobs would usually activate all the way, but they're not because it's heavy, and so it just does it to a much higher value. That way you can measure like big groups of mobs instead of just like 3 of them. So the most common use for pressure plates is to activate small circuits when you stand next to them, see how it hands me a block. Another really common use is basically to use them to open doors, because doors can take redstone signals. And something pretty cool, it also activates iron doors and iron trapdoors, and also regular wooden trapdoors. Because basically wooden doors and trapdoors, you can open them with your hand, but iron doors, you can't do anything to them, and the only way they actually can be activated is with some kind of redstone input. Which is really cool, because you make like locked doors and stuff like that. And next we have tripwire hooks. So tripwire hooks are pretty simple. You put them on 2 blocks that are facing each other, and you put string between it, and it creates just pretty much a tight line. Anytime you step across that line, it triggers a redstone output, which this is very useful for traps, because it's really hard to see when you're walking in a hallway. And basically, if you break them normally, it does actually set it off. Unless you use shears, then you can basically deactivate the system without tripping the actual mechanism. And also, if you want, you can always just jump over them, or walk really close to the actual tripwire hook, and it won't set it off. 2 very basic inputs. One would be the lever. It's basically just a redstone torch, except when you click it, it turns the torch on, or the switch on. And when you click it again, it turns it off. Then you have the trap chest. Trap chests work as basically regular chests, except they have a little red lining around the hinge of it. Not the hinge, the actual like lock piece of it. And basically when you open them, they emit a redstone signal. This is really good for traps, because as soon as someone tries to open the chest, you can make some kind of piston trap or explosive trap or something like that. Daylight sensors are really useful. They're really fun to use too. I'll definitely be doing a video on these. Basically, they detect how light an environment is, or how bright it is, and they emit a pulse accordingly. And basically, noon is the brightest point possible, midnight is the darkest point possible, so at like sunrise, you'll get like half the strength, and at noon, you'll get full strength. And basically, you can click them, and it sets it to nighttime mode, and then it senses how dark an environment is. So midnight is the highest strength, and noon is the lowest strength. You see right now it's noon, so there's absolutely no pulse coming out of it. This can be super useful if you're trying to turn on lights at nighttime or something like that, or have some kind of daylight cycle activation sleep thing. I don't know. Targets are new and also pretty cool. So basically they emit a redstone signal depending on how accurate you are. So a very poor shot like that only has a couple pieces of redstone that activates. But if I try to hit something really close to the center, it does a really strong signal. So you can use redstone lamps and basically show how accurate your shot was. The next component is observers. Observers are one of the most used and most useful redstone components there is. Basically, they have a phase side and they have an output side. Observers work by basically, they're like comparators, except they detect block updates instead of item updates. So if I place any kind of block here or change it, and it makes an output, and if I change it again, it does another output. This can work using bells or growing crops, and it's pretty useful. You can also do a chain of them like this, where one detects the other, because if this basically detects something, it updates and becomes powered, and then the next observer can detect that, and it just goes down a whole chain reaction. So if I place a block here, it'll just go all the way down and trigger that. And they're really useful for doing redstone underwater because they're not redstone dust, so they won't break from water or something like that, but they can act in pretty much the same way. And also you can use them and you can make them go straight up like this. And because they're all detecting each other, I can do this here, and the redstone signal goes straight up. Now we're getting to our next section of outputs. So pistons are one of the most commonly used outputs. Basically, they take a redstone signal and they extend one block, then they retract when the signal's gone. There's 2 types of pistons. You have regular pistons and you have sticky pistons. Regular pistons basically just push blocks away from them, and they also can push people or items away from them. Sticky pistons, however, push blocks away from them, then they pull them back to the starting position. Any piston can push a maximum of 12 blocks. If you put any more blocks than that, it just won't extend. Then you can use slime blocks. The slime blocks, how it works is pretty much you put slime blocks on a piston, you attach blocks to it, and when the slime blocks are pushed, they push other blocks with them. And honey blocks are pretty cool because they work just like slime blocks, except if you activate a slime block, it will not push a honey block. That way you can have 2 different systems without going over that 12 block limit, because all of this counts as 6 blocks. If I add too many blocks to this, it just won't push this system either. The next 2 outputs are droppers and dispensers. So droppers and dispensers are very similar. Droppers have kind of a smiley face, and dispensers have kind of just a surprised face on them. And basically how they work, they have an inventory like this. You can fill up with whatever items you want, and when you power them, they will dispense randomly, just a random item in here. So if it's only arrows, it'll dispense an arrow, but if a bunch of different stuff, it's just completely random what it dispenses. And basically the difference of them is when you power it, dispensers will shoot out an item, but droppers will just drop them. So if an item cannot be shot, it will also just be dropped, but it's very easy Or it's very useful to do stuff like that. You saw that arrow fired, while this one just handed me an arrow. This is also good for like mob spawn eggs that'll spawn mobs. The dropper will just give me a spawn egg, while the actual dispenser will actually spawn the mob. And this is cool too, because like stuff like boats work, where this will just give me a boat, and this one will actually spawn in a boat. And yeah, they're pretty cool though. But if there's something like if I just put like redstone dust in both of them, they'll both just drop because you can't exactly like place blocks or deploy redstone dust. It just hands it to me again. And finally in this section we have redstone lamps. I've been using these the whole video. They're very simple. It's just a block that basically just looks normal, and then as soon as you power it, it actually just changes its texture and it emits lights. This is good because I can place it in any kind of place like a dark alley like that, and I can hit a button and then it'll basically light up the whole room. And these are pretty cool, and I'd like to use these more, but basically mobs will spawn if there is darkness, so it's not good to keep parts of your base dark. But if I can find a way to do it, it'd be really cool, because then I can just have like rooms that you just go into, you hit a light switch, it turns on all the lights. They basically act like light bulbs though. And the last section we have to cover is the transport section. So first we're going to cover hoppers. So hoppers are pretty simple and they're really cool too. So basically how hoppers work is you have a chest and you can have a hopper that basically drains one chest and goes to another chest. So I have sea lanterns in here, and basically it's draining them. They go through the hopper, which has 5 inventory slots. Then it'll go into this chest, and basically just moves things from one place to another. You can also do things like this, where you have basically the chest emptying, and you have a whole train of hoppers which go into this chest. This is the basic, most easiest way to transport items. And also, if you power a hopper, it basically locks that hopper, and it stops filling, and then you can unlock it, and then it'll keep going. This works with this one too, like I did at the beginning, where basically you can just prevent stuff from moving through. That one's empty anyway though. And also hoppers are very basic in a sense that you can also just throw items at them, and it just takes in the items and puts in its own inventory inside, which is pretty cool for just collecting basic stuff. And now the next transport, we have rails. Rails are basically just train tracks. You put a minecart on them, and then if you hold forward, you can basically travel across them. And there's a couple different types of rails. There's the basic ones, they just are used to move across. They do pretty much nothing. Then we have powered rails, which are just like the normal ones, except, let me get a torch real quick. Powered ones are just like the normal ones, except when you power them, they basically speed up the minecart and cause it to move automatically. And these will be a lot faster than normal rails if you're looking to speed up your minecart track or make it go uphill where you need more power to do so. Detector rails are basically pressure plate rails. As soon as a minecart goes across them, it detects it and puts a redstone output. Then you have activator rails. Activator rails are pretty simple. Basically, you power them, and if they're powered while you go over them, it forces you to get out of the minecart. And eventually, it'll break the minecart, I believe, if it goes on for too long. And yeah, that's all the rails. And the last 3 components I have to review are minecarts, which basically minecarts are simple. They go along tracks, and you can get in them, and also so can mobs. Then we have minecarts with the chests. Minecarts with the chests are pretty cool because they actually have an inventory just like a chest, except they can move in any way you control them, which also means that hoppers can put stuff into minecarts with chests, then unload them in a different area. So this is really like a different way other than hoppers to transport items over a long distance without paying all the iron that hoppers cost. Then we have minecart hoppers, which basically can do this exact function with a small inventory, but also something they can do is if you throw an item on top of a block that they're under, they'll actually pick it up through the block and put it into some kind of hopper, or you can put it onto one of these systems and basically will go under a whole tract of land and then deposit everything. I've used these like in my sheep farms, in my Minecraft world. If you haven't seen that series, please go check it out. It's really fun. But basically I have a bunch of sheep, and as soon as they're sheared, all the wool just falls on top, and then it just gets put into that minecart with hopper. And then it'll go down here into this other hopper. So it's really useful. And yeah, that is everything I have to cover in this basics video. Thank you everyone so much for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. It means so much to me in Wizard, and it really helps us out so much. We're trying to get more subscribers, and it's amazing. It costs you nothing. You can hit the bell, and it basically tells you whenever I upload new videos. And I plan on continuing this series and doing a couple other videos. Hopefully, I want to try to keep them pretty short and explain just some basic concepts and teach Redstone from right here, which this episode has been the absolute basics, and to get more complicated. But thank you everyone so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe again, and see you later. Bye!